Picture the floor of a South Chicago engine plant in the 1970s. It's a chaotic assault on the senses' deafening machine roar, the thick smell of oil, and the constant grinding pressure of production quotas. Amidst the grime stands a man who doesn't quite fit. He's a Cambridge-educated mathematician turned sociologist, there to document the misery of the working class. By all traditional Marxist logic, he should be observing a battlefield. A clear line between the exploited workers and the coercive owners, forcing them to labor against their will. But watch him closely, and you see something bizarre. He isn't slowing down to resist the system. He is frantically, obsessively feeding metal into his machine, taking dangerous risks with his own fingers, practically sweating with adrenaline. He's trying to hit 140% of his daily quota. He isn't doing this because he needs the meager bonus money, nor because the foreman is screaming at him. He's doing it because he is addicted to the game. In that moment, the entire script flipped. He realized he wasn't being forced to work harder by a whip. He was tricking himself into working harder for the sheer psychological thrill of beating an arbitrary number. He discovered that the most powerful tool of control wasn't fear, but a manufactured consent, where workers voluntarily drove themselves to the brink just to feel the rush of winning a rigged game. This disturbing paradox, why we enthusiastically participate in a system designed to use us, became the seed of a radical new understanding of power. Okay, let's unpack this. A core mission of this deep dive is to explore the radical ideas sparked by that moment. How the game of work, from 1970s factories to, today's gig economy apps, manufacturers our consent.
Right.
And also how one sociologist's commitment to action reshaped our understanding of power and the purpose of academic knowledge itself.
What's so fascinating here is that we're moving beyond the simple concept of coercion. I mean, brute force exploitation.
Yeah, the whip.
Exactly. We're getting into the subtle, deeply psychological dynamics of work, what sociologists call labor process control, and how it can turn exploitation into a personal quest for meaning or for victory.
And that paradox feels even more relevant today, doesn't it? In our, algorithmically managed world.
Oh, absolutely. It's more sophisticated now, and it really speaks to how these inequalities persist globally.
So we have to start with the origin story of the man himself, Michael Burawoy, because his path is, well, it's just not what you'd expect for a sociologist who ends up redefining labor studies.
Not at all.
I mean, he's a Cambridge-educated mathematician, the son of a refugee. He's deep in this elite world of abstract numbers, clean equations, but he just feels this profound disconnect from the real world's chaos.
And that restlessness, that discomfort with abstraction, that's the real catalyst for everything that comes after. It's not just academic curiosity. It's a genuine need for, real lived experience and political engagement.
So that restlessness first takes him to places like South Africa and India, kind of seeking adventure.
Yep.
But the crucial stop is 1968. He goes to Zambia, a newly independent African nation. And he doesn't just observe. He gets a job in the copper mines, which were the literal engine of the Zambian economy. He wanted to understand the hopes, the promises, and the betrayals of a post-colonial state from the inside.
He saw colonial despotism up close. In that experience, seeing how power worked at that raw extraction level, it just fundamentally shaped his whole approach. It gave him this commitment to participant observation.
Right. You don't just stand outside looking in.
No, you become part of the system you're studying. You have to experience its contradictions firsthand.
So when he eventually lands in that South Chicago engine plant in the 70s, he has this moment of intense self-doubt because he finds the work of an earlier ethnographer, Donald Roy, who had studied the exact same factory floor 30 years earlier.
Right, and Roy's work was good. It was really sophisticated, detailing how workers dealt with management. So Burawoy's first thought is, well, what can I add? He was afraid his work would just be second-rate, but redundant.
But then he has this realization.
Yeah, the 30-year time gap. It's a gift. He called it a gold mine for an overtime study. He could actually compare two distinct historical periods.
And that comparison immediately forced him away from what he called isolationist ethnography.
Exactly. He couldn't just study the factory as if it existed in a vacuum, separate from all the political and economic forces happening outside its walls.
He had to look beyond the grime and the machines. He had to analyze the company's shift from being in the competitive sector to the monopoly sector and how tighter state regulation was changing the whole relationship between management and labor.
Precisely. And this forced him to see this massive societal shift taking place. He was moving from a despotic social order in the 1940s, all about fear and absolute managerial power, to a hegemonic social order by the 1970s.
Which is all about consent. And that brings us right back to the central puzzle, the paradox that just broke all the traditional models. If capitalism is based on coercion and exploitation, why do workers cooperate in making profits with, as he put it, surprising energy and creativity?
This is the critical question. The classical Marxist model would say workers should be slowing down, resisting, maybe even sabotaging the system. But Burawoy saw the exact opposite. He saw cooperation, high effort.
A real zeal to work harder than they had to. And his answer was this core mechanism, the game of making out.
Making out is just a brilliant concept because it's a social construction that completely transforms this monotonous, repetitive work.
How does it work?
Well, the process basically synchronizes the workers' efforts with production quotas and piece rate pay. So it turns this dull, repetitive labor into a personal contest. The goal is just to make out by beating the official quota, say, hitting 140% of your target.
And this gets back to the paradox from the intro. Why are you risking your fingers for what he calls a meager bonus? I mean, it wasn't life-changing money, right?
No, not at all. It might only be a few extra dollars a week. And this is the psychological core of manufactured consent. The real motivator wasn't the money. It was the immediate, visceral thrill of winning the game.
It's about satisfaction.
It's about psychological satisfaction,
Yeah.
It lets the worker prove their skill, their intelligence, their mastery over the machine and the whole system.
So the game wasn't really about the money. It was about, what, social status on the factory floor? Self-worth?
Exactly. Within that shop floor culture, your ability to make out created a whole internal hierarchy. The best machinists weren't just fast, they were clever. They knew the shortcuts, the tricks to game the machine, the right rhythms.
And if you couldn't make out,
then you weren't just a poor worker, you were a social failure in that little world. The game generated this constant feedback loop of perceived competence. It made you feel good about yourself.
and the power of this is just driven home by Burawoy's own personal confession, which is so striking for an academic. He admits that he, the objective Cambridge sociologist, became totally addicted to the game.
It's an incredible admission. He wrote that he would push himself and his machine to the absolute limit, sometimes risking his own life for one extra part.
The desire to win just overrode his sanity and his whole political critique of the system.
And that anecdote is so critical because it takes the whole finding from just observation to a lived, undeniable truth. If the sociologist who knows intellectually that the system is exploitative can get sucked in, well, then the mechanism of control is profound.
So consent isn't just assumed.
No, it is actively, systematically, and cleverly manufactured right there on the shop floor.
And this process creates what he called a social bubble or an internal state. This game, making out, it becomes so engrossing that it's like this massive distraction. How does that change the politics of the workplace?
It fundamentally redirects everyone's consciousness. It completely masks the larger economic realities, where the wages come from, how much profit is being extracted, the systemic exploitation.
So instead of looking up and fighting the owners.
Right, the clear class conflict.
Yeah.
All the workers' energy is diverted sideways or downwards. It's focused on beating the clock or dealing with a machine breakdown or competing with the person next to you. The game is the immediate reality. The exploitation is just distant background noise.
And the organizational genius of it is that management doesn't even have to hire more supervisors. The workers are basically supervising themselves. Their ingenuity, their shortcuts, their creativity. All of that self-directed effort is channeled voluntarily toward the company's main goal.
Which is increased production. It's labor control through cooperation, not through fear. And that's what defines the hegemonic regime. The profound implication is this. By choosing to play the game, workers are inherently consenting to the rules of that game.
And by doing that, they're subjecting themselves to the whole exploitative logic of the system.
They internalize the production norms as personal challenges. They legitimize the very system that sets those norms.
Can we just clarify the shift he saw from the despotic to the hegemonic? The 1940s factory that Roy studied was despotic, right? Control through fear, the foreman's power, threat of being fired.
Yes, pure coercion.
So how did things like the union contract and grievance procedures change that dynamic? How did they help manufacture consent in the 70s?
That institutional scaffolding is the absolute heart of the hegemonic shift. The union contract didn't get rid of exploitation, it institutionalized it. It made it predictable. So now workers had specific, defined procedures for grievances, defined pay rates, clear ways to appeal an arbitrary decision. When a dispute came up, they'd appeal to the terms of the contract, the written rules of the game.
So by using those channels.
They're implicitly accepting the system itself as legitimate, even if they hate a specific outcome. The struggle becomes about enforcing the rules, not changing the basic structure of who owns what.
The power of Burawoy's work, though, it didn't just stop at that Chicago factory. He saw that this micro-level observation had huge macro implications.
He did. He realized the workplace isn't just an economic space, it's a political arena. It has its own system of governance, which he called the factory regime.
And expanding the framework like that allowed him to move beyond just, a single case study.
Right, he could start to compare entire political economies, not just isolated plants. The type of regime he found depends on market pressures and, crucially, the role the state plays in regulating labor. This global comparative approach lets you see how different forms of capitalism or even state socialism achieve control over their workers.
So let's look at the two main capitalist types he identified. We've talked about the hegemonic regime, like the U.S. in the 70s. Consent is manufactured through games like making out, but it's anchored by things like union contracts, grievance procedures.
Exactly. The system relies on this illusion of worker rights and choice within the system.
And the contrast to that is the despotic regime.
Right, which relies on direct top-down coercion, fear, sheer market despotism. Burawoy's earlier experience in the Zambian copper industry was a perfect example. Control was maintained by the constant threat of losing your job, physical intimidation, and just a total lack of any institutional protection.
So managers have almost absolute power.
Almost total. The workers' only defense is, spontaneous, unorganized resistance.
But the framework really took off when he decided to tackle the huge anomaly of state socialism. As a Marxist sociologist, he felt the field just couldn't ignore the Soviet experiment.
Which many Western Marxists did. They just dismissed it as deformed capitalism or statism.
Yeah.
But he wanted a true comparative analysis against a non-capitalist system.
And that led him to Hungarian factories in the 1980s, where he found a major puzzle.
A huge one. The conventional wisdom was that Soviet bloc workers had basically secured the right not to work hard. They were protected from market pressures. But he found evidence that workers at places like the Red Star tractor factory were working twice as hard as the guys in the U.S. factory.
Twice as hard, even with that job security. So why? The mechanism of control had to be totally different.
It was. He called it a bureaucratic, despotic regime. In state socialism, the state, the Communist Party, and the factory management were all one thing, an inseparable triumvirate.
So there's no independent authority to appeal to?
None. No real union, no independent courts. If the party said a quota was necessary, you met it. But the real coercion wasn't just, a guy with a gun. It was systemic. It was built into the structure of the socialist economy.
Oh, so?
The whole system was based on central appropriation and redistribution of surplus, all justified as being in the interest of the people. But this central planning led to massive inefficiency, chronic shortages.
Right.
So managers hoarded resources. And workers knew that if they didn't fix the constant breakdowns or find the parts they needed or just organize production themselves, the line would stop and they wouldn't get paid or they'd miss out on crucial bonuses or essential goods.
So the workers had to manage production themselves, not for a gain, but just out of sheer necessity to keep the whole inefficient system from collapsing.
Exactly. They were forced into this intense effort just to prevent a total shutdown and secure basic goods. But they didn't just submit. They developed this unique form of resistance.
Which was what?
They responded to all the party rituals, the claims of efficiency and equality with these comic and sometimes angry tales of just how inefficient and unjust the system actually was. They used the system's own ideology of socialist fairness against the party state for failing to deliver on its promises.
So they were basically critiquing the system for not being socialist enough.
Yes. They had a vision of a more just, more efficient socialism, and they saw it being betrayed every day by this bureaucratic despotism. And that critique was channeled in different ways in different places. In Hungary, for example, economic reforms allowed for a second economy, some private enterprise.
Which funneled that dissent into individual stuff, like a side business.
Right. But in Poland, that same critical energy created something monumental.
Solidarity.
In Poland, you had this embryonic civil society supported by networks of workers and intellectuals, and crucially, the Catholic Church. That whole infrastructure allowed the collective critique to grow into a sustained nationwide movement that challenged the state's legitimacy.
Then, after the collapse of state socialism, Burawoy faced this new challenge, the transition to capitalism, which was often driven by workers who were just deeply cynical about any form of socialism.
It was a chaotic, often depressing time. A lot of factory workers felt they'd been fooled by the state socialist rhetoric for decades, and they were ready to embrace the supposed freedoms of the market. They didn't realize, as Burawoy noted, how good they had it in terms of guaranteed jobs and basic welfare.
And this chaos led him and others to rediscover Karl Polanyi's great 1944 work, The Great Transformation. Why did Polanyi suddenly become so relevant?
Polanyi's core insight was his warning that there is no market road to a market society. The market isn't a natural state of being. It requires massive, often brutal political intervention to force society to conform to its logic.
And the post-Soviet experience proved that.
It really did. Simply lifting central controls didn't create a functional market. It created chaos and what he called economic involution, where factories just became these self-sustaining survival units instead of profit centers.
Polanyi's whole framework is based on this idea of fictitious commodities. We should probably define that because it's critical to Burawoy's bigger vision.
It is. Polanyi argued that capitalism requires labor, money, and nature to be treated as commodities, things you can buy and sell. But they're fictitious because they weren't originally produced to be sold on a market.
Right. Labor is just human life. Nature is just there.
And money is just a token of exchange. Treating them like commodities, he argued, subjects society to these incredibly destructive market forces.
And the history of modern society for Polanyi is a double movement. The attempt to commodify these things, followed by a social reaction to protect society from the damage.
Precisely. Burawoy took this idea and expanded it into three distinct waves of marketization. The first wave was the classic 19th century creation of markets for labor, money, and nature.
Okay.
The second wave in the 20th century involved more commodification, but also led to state regulation and welfare provisions, the New Deal, European welfare states, designed to protect society from the market.
And now we're in the third wave, the era of neoliberalism and globalization. And this wave adds a fourth fictitious commodity.
The third wave is a renewed global push to commodify labor, money, nature, and now, knowledge itself. And this is the profound implication for our deep dive today. The commodification of knowledge is key to the modern system of control.
This is where it gets really interesting. If the factory game used a kind of piece rate knowledge to boost physical production, the digital economy uses knowledge itself, our data, our interactions, as the raw material.
Exactly. The commodification of knowledge paves the way for algorithmic management and the gig economy. Our everyday life generates this surplus of information that is instantly turned into a commodity. It's a perfect, almost invisible marriage of control and profit.
The foreman is replaced by market despotism, and now by the control architecture built into the digital platform itself.
The system just finds new, ever more subtle ways to turn human activity, even our desire for connection, into a sellable asset.
So we move from the engine plant to the driver's seat. How does this concept of manufactured consent apply to the gig economy? We're talking about a workplace without walls, no managers, no coworkers. It's totally isolated.
Well, traditional labor theory would look at this setting and predict total alienation, high turnover. Without the usual organizational practices to, scaffold meaning-making, the work should feel like an assembly line in the head run by the tyranny of the algorithm.
But that's not what's happening. Workers stay highly engaged. So how do ride-hailing drivers, for instance, avoid that alienation and stay in the game?
They create their own workplace games, just like the factory workers. But since the normal organizational structure is gone, the games are built around the only two touch points they have, the customer and the app itself.
And this leads to a fragmented meaning-making process.
It does. It leads drivers to adopt one of two very different and sometimes simultaneous strategies. There's the relational game and the efficiency game.
Okay, let's break down the relational game. This sounds like the modern version of finding social meaning at work. What's the goal?
The goal is to craft these positive, personalized service encounters. And success is tracked through high customer ratings. They're often aiming for like a 4.87 out of 5.0. It's about seeing the work as a mutual human connection.
And how do they play this game? What are they doing in the car?
They're proactively personalizing the experience. It can be simple things like offering bottled water or phone chargers, or it can be more elaborate. You see drivers using props, finding mutual interests, sometimes turning rides into professional contacts or friendships. They see themselves as providing a human service. They call themselves ambassadors.
So the car itself becomes a stage for this performance.
Yes. The car becomes an extension of the service. They curate music, some display crystals, others use social awareness cues like music by certain artists to spark conversations about social issues. They're trying to engage in a cultural exchange.
And their success is validated instantly by the app.
Right. Compliments and high ratings give them this tangible, immediate emotional boost that confirms their competence and their self-worth.
And this relational game fosters what's called the amicable stance. This is the winner self.
Correct. They feel certain about their success and their future. They see themselves as entrepreneurs, as skillful, as enjoying their work. They really internalize the platform's rhetoric, seeing themselves as partners and chalking up their success to God and the algorithm, or just feeling lucky.
But then you have the complete opposite, the efficiency game. This is the driver who's trying to maximize profit and minimize all interaction.
It's totally adversarial and transactional. The goal is to maximize money per minute, which means minimizing any extra behavior. The driver basically becomes a self-protective machine.
So how does this driver see the customer?
The customer is depersonalized. They're just a faceless fare, or at worst, a self-centered monster. The driver puts up these strict social and physical boundaries. They'll avoid eye contact, refuse small talk, maybe put a bag on the front seat to signal, "Don't talk to me."
And we saw that really specific example of refusing to do anything that cuts into the bottom line.
The story about the driver refusing the McDonald's drive-thru is perfect. He wouldn't risk his car smelling like fries for what he calculated as 17 cents a minute of waiting time. It's about protecting the boundary between his private property, his car, and his labor.
And their relationship with the app is also completely different.
Total mistrust. The app is the opponent. It's out to get them. Efficiency drivers believe the app systematically cheats them, miscalculates fares, and withholds the best rides. So they're constantly checking their earnings, sending "correct my fare" requests. They don't trust the app's data.
And this leads them to the adversarial stance, the loser self.
Right. In this stance, drivers are painfully aware of the algorithm's power and the exploitation. They feel stuck in a money game, a cog in a money-making machine. They feel stigmatized, exploited, deeply pessimistic. Their whole focus is on manipulating the algorithm to extract whatever they can, which often just leads to burnout.
The really fascinating and frankly depressing thing here is that these two mindsets, the confident winner self and the pessimistic loser self, are being constructed in the exact same economic reality.
It's a perfect demonstration of how manufactured consent works in a digital world. Consent is produced not by a manager, but by the illusion of autonomous control, the flexibility to work when you want, and the satisfaction you get from winning one of these two games.
But does this focus on individual success, this self-responsible entrepreneur mindset, actually get in the way of collective action?
That is the critical sociological question here. The fragmented individual games are a huge barrier to organizing. If drivers are focused on their individual performance against the algorithm, they're less likely to see a common cause. The winner self sees success as a personal victory. The loser self sees exploitation as an individual problem.
And the consent is fragile. We noted that even the most committed relational game players can flip instantly if the system fails them.
Precisely. The second, a driver who really believes in the partner identity gets a dubious ban because of an unfair customer complaint. Their whole worldview shatters. The illusion of autonomy is gone, and they see the naked despotic power of the algorithm. And that realization often leads them to quit.
Okay, so we've tracked this critical journey from the factory floor to the global political economy and now to the digital age. In his later career, Burawoy turned that same critical eye back on his own field, sociology.
Yeah, he became deeply dissatisfied that his research, the kind of deep dive we're doing right now, was mostly confined to obscure journals read by a small circle of other academics.
This is where his work becomes this crucial ethical project about the purpose of knowledge itself.
He framed the whole challenge for sociology with two core questions. Knowledge for whom? Is our audience academic or public? And knowledge for what? Is our knowledge instrumental, used to achieve a goal, or is it reflexive, used to question the goals themselves?
And answering those questions led him to create this diagnostic map of the field, dividing it into 4 distinct but interdependent types of sociology.
Right. So first you have professional sociology. This is the core. It's the rigorous peer-reviewed research. It provides the hard core of reliable knowledge and gives the whole discipline legitimacy.
The foundation.
The foundation. Second, there's critical sociology. This is the field's conscience. It questions the assumptions and the biases of professional sociology's own research. It keeps the field honest.
Okay, and then you have the two outward-facing types. Third is policy sociology.
Right. This is research done for a client, a government agency, a corporation. The goal is defined by that client. Its purpose is to provide solutions or legitimate existing solutions for them.
And finally, the one he became famous for, championing, public sociology.
Public sociology is a genuine two-way dialogue between academics and the public. Unlike policy sociology, where the client sets the agenda, here the agenda of both the academic and the public is brought to the table. The goal is to have a real conversation about where society is headed.
It sounds like he wasn't trying to say one is better than the other. It's about balance.
Exactly. They're all interdependent. Professional sociology provides the methods and the knowledge. Without it, public sociology is just uninformed chatter. But professional sociology needs the public issues brought in by public sociology to keep it relevant and vital.
And when he talks about public sociology, he breaks it down even further into two modes of engagement.
He does. First, there's traditional public sociology. This is, sociologists engaging broad publics through accessible means. Think C. Wright Mills writing essays for national magazines, or someone on a major news program today, setting the terms of a wider debate.
And then there's the more hands-on, organic public sociology.
This is working closely with a visible, thick, active, local, and often counter-public. So, sociologists working with unions, community organizers, welfare clients, it's a sustained, embedded commitment. The two modes are complementary. Traditional frames the big debates. Organic grounds them in lived experience.
And he even identified students as a key public that sociologists often just ignore.
Right. We produce tens of thousands of sociology BAs every year. They're a powerful, ready-made public. The task isn't to treat them like empty vessels, but to help them use the sociological imagination to turn their own private troubles into public issues. They become ambassadors for the discipline outside the university.
But this ambition for public sociology runs up against a huge challenge, which he called the scissors movement.
Yeah, this is a really revealing idea. The paradox is that the desire for public sociology is strong, but it's hard to achieve because over the last 50 years, sociology's political center of gravity has moved to the left. It's become more critical, while the world it studies has moved to the right, driven by neoliberalism.
The scissors have opened wide, and there's actual data on this.
The data is pretty striking. In 1968, about 54% of sociologists were against the Vietnam War, which basically mirrored the general population. But by 2003, 75% of sociologists who voted were against the Iraq War, at a time when 75% of the general population supported it.
That's a huge split. It means sociology has developed this distinct critical perspective that's often completely at odds with the mainstream.
And this is why public sociology is so hard, but also so necessary. Sociologists are often speaking a critical language the public just rejects, so the discipline needs a clear sociological standpoint to justify its existence. If economics stands for the market and political science for the state, where does sociology stand?
And for Burawoy, the answer is civil society.
Civil society, that whole realm of associations, movements, publics outside the direct control of the state and the economy, that's sociology's home turf. Its moral mission, he argues, is to defend the interests of humanity, and especially civil society, against the encroachment of the market and the state.
So in our age of market tyranny and state despotism, public sociology defends the social by studying the state or the economy from the standpoint of civil society.
Exactly. He warns that when civil society is completely destroyed, like under Stalin or Pinochet, sociology disappears too. Its existence is tied to the health of the public sphere.
And this brings us right back to the university itself, which is going through its own crisis that threatens that public mission.
We're watching the university, which is once a sacrosanct public good, become increasingly privatized. Public funding has declined, and the structure is shifting toward a profit-centered corporation. Knowledge is being treated as a product to be sold.
Which is a huge problem. You're replacing tenured faculty with contingent lecturers, focusing on tuition hikes and private donors, and taking power away from the faculty.
And this creates a cascade of crises: a fiscal crisis, a governance crisis, an identity crisis where money decides which disciplines survive, and crucially, a legitimacy crisis where the public starts to question the value of research that seems detached from their concerns.
And here we have the ultimate expression of that third wave of marketization, the commodification of knowledge itself.
Mm-hmm. The university, once the guardian of a public good, is turning knowledge into a sellable asset. And this is a source of widespread protest. You see it in rising student debt, the devaluation of degrees. Sociology's role as a defender of civil society is threatened when the institution that houses it is just another profit center.
So what does his entire life's work tell us about the future?
I think it argues that the future of public sociology, and really the health of civil society, depends on sociologists recognizing that they are unavoidably participants in the world they study. They have to resist the corporate university, push back against the commodification of knowledge, and carry public sociology forward as a social movement beyond the academy. We've really tracked the trajectory of power from the physical coercion of the 19th century factory to the psychological seduction of the 1970s game, and finally to the seamless, often invisible algorithmic control of the gig economy. The deepest forms of control today, they aren't rooted in overt force. They're rooted in the psychological structures of engagement, that rush of beating a quota, the digital thrill of maximizing a surge price.
And what began as this observation about factory workers tricking themselves into working harder has become this incredibly powerful lens for understanding why we stay engaged in systems that are, at their core, exploitative. Structure changes, the algorithm replaces the foreman, but the outcome manufactured consent, it stays remarkably similar.
Because it taps into our innate human desire for meaning and validation, even if that validation is completely arbitrary. And ultimately, Burawoy reminds us that the value of this kind of deep, rigorous knowledge is only fully realized when it leaves the ivory tower. His whole commitment to public sociology is this powerful demand that our academic insights have to serve the defense of civil society. They have to expose the hidden political structures that shape our everyday lives, from the assembly line to the rideshare passenger seat, ensuring that knowledge remains a force for liberation and not just for profit.
This has been an extensive deep dive into the paradoxical politics of production and knowledge.